Hello, everyone. Welcome to A Good Night for a Murder, a Victorian true crime podcast. My name is Kim, and we have made it to March of 2025. Usually, by this point in the year, A Good Night for a Murder is on spring break. I actually wanted to squeeze in one last episode, but I overextended myself. So, with as much grace as I can, I've decided to release an episode that was initially exclusively available on Patreon as the season finale for Season 3. Thank you so much for all of your continued support. I am continuously surprised at how far and wide my little voice has reached and how many of you keep coming back to hear me tell you tales of Victorian true crime. Shameless plug for the Good Night for Our Murder Patreon. If you think you may miss new episodes during the break, there are over 60 bonus and Good Night Snack episodes on Patreon right now. And it's a great time to join because I'll be pausing payments for the next few months, meaning you can binge clear through until June and only pay once instead of monthly. Plus, there is a free 7-day trial for both the $3 Ladies' Maid and Valette and $5 Housekeeper and Butler tiers. Ladies' Maids and Valettes have access to 3 seasons now worth of bonus episodes, and Housekeepers and Butlers have access to all of the bonus episodes plus the first season of Goodnight Snack episodes. Thank you again for a great Season 3, everyone. Let's get on with tonight's story. A Good Night for a Murder is a true crime podcast that does cover stories including death, violence, sexual assault, and other adult themes. Please take care while listening. What would you make of a psychic medium who used their gift to foretell the deaths of those around them? Pretty spooky, right? But what if they used this gift to take out life insurance policies shortly before those predicted death dates? Now it feels a little less spooky and a little bit more suspicious. This is exactly what happened in the case we are covering tonight. This is the story of fortune teller and murderer Louisa Lindloff. Louisa was born in Germany in February of 1871. She immigrated to the U.S. and settled in the Milwaukee area. Sometime before 1890, she married Julius Gronke. Together, they would have 3 children. The eldest was Frida, who was born in 1890, followed by Alma, born in 1891, and finally a boy, Arthur Alfred, born in 1897. About this time, Louisa started to be more outspoken about a gift she had. She claimed that since she was a child, she possessed the gift of prophecy. These prophecies came to her in the form of communication from her spirit guides on the other side. We've talked before about the prominence of spiritualism and psychics in the Victorian era on the show, but to reiterate, the spiritualist movement was really at its height of popularity in the mid to late 1800s. By 1897, at least 8 million people across the US and Europe subscribed to spiritualist beliefs. Things such as hypnotism, thought transference or telepathy, mediumship, apparitions and hauntings, and seances were, by and large, considered to be very real, widespread occurrences. Not only did people believe in these things, but the scientific community took them very seriously as well. As for Louisa, though, one type of premonition she claimed to receive was when someone was going to die. She would later tell a reporter that she'd predicted the death of a neighbor so far back as when she was a little girl in Germany. That, she said, was when I got my first whipping. Interesting lady, right? In 1905, Louisa and her family fell victim to a stroke of bad luck when Louisa's husband, Julius, contracted a mysterious illness that doctors could not figure out. He eventually succumbed to this illness, where the official cause of death was curiously listed as sunstroke. That same year, a boarder who had been staying on at the Gronke home, Charles Lippow, also died. His cause of death was unexplained. Now, this sounds like it must have been very emotionally taxing for Louisa, however, not so much as you might think. Because remember, Louisa had her spirit guides on the other side informing her that these events would happen. Plus, she had collected on life insurance policies for both her husband and Mr. Lippow, which certainly offered some sort of consolation for her loss. In 1906, at the age of 35, Louisa remarried to William Lindloff, who was the picture of health and vitality at the young age of 20. Good for you, Louisa. Only a few short months into their marriage, though, there was trouble in paradise in the form of her new brother-in-law, John Otto Lindloff. John had shown romantic interest in Louisa's eldest daughter, Frida, but Louisa disapproved. Either way, Louisa saw it fit to take out a life insurance policy on John, perhaps looking out for her daughter's best interests. As John and Frida were not yet married, though, Louisa named herself as the beneficiary. Shortly thereafter, John died, and Louisa collected on the life insurance policy. Do we see where this is going? 2 years later, Louisa's daughter Frida would die at the young age of 18 from what was said to be typhoid fever. And again, Louisa collected on the life insurance policy. After this, the family moved to Chicago and took up residence at 2044 South Ogden Avenue. This is where Louisa officially launched her mediumship business. She would offer private readings and seances, and she also conducted what she called weekly circles. These were sort of like group readings where Louisa was said to enter into a trance, then she would relate a specific prophecy or respond to a specific question for each guest. She also claimed to own a crystal ball that contained an actual tear from the eye of Cleopatra. She said it cost her $500, which would be about $15,000 in today's money. Louisa claimed that one tear enables me to read the future. When I gaze into the ball, I see the tear at its center expand in size, and within I see what will come to pass in future years. In 1910, her second husband, William, came down with a mysterious illness. Odd, the same thing was said to have happened to her first husband. In this case, though, William unfortunately descended into psychosis and would eventually die on August 3rd, 1910. The cause of death was listed as heart trouble. As before, Louisa collected on the life insurance payout. Now, it had not escaped attention that Louisa showed very little emotion in response to these rather unrelenting deaths of 4 of her family members. To this, Louisa would respond that she had visions of their deaths, including their specific death dates, and her visions were always right, so she already had time to prepare herself in advance. On August 4th, 1911, Louisa's second daughter, Alma, died at the age of 19. The cause of her death was said to be heart trouble brought on by too much dancing. Alma's doctor would later testify that Louisa had predicted the exact date of her daughter's death. Later that year, Louisa's neighbor, Mrs. E. Grober, died. Louisa was said to have predicted that death too. In June of 1912, Louisa's 15-year-old son, Arthur, became seriously ill. Like his father, stepfather, and sister before him, his symptoms were quite mysterious. But the doctor that was called this time could not help but notice, as odd as it sounded at the time, that his symptoms suggested poisoning. Plus, Arthur mentioned to the doctor that his mother had given him a, quote, weird-tasting water. This doctor finally had the good sense to remove Arthur from the care of his mother and place him under the care of his hospital staff. Louisa objected, but the doctor was able to override her decision, and Arthur was indeed brought to the hospital. Unfortunately, help came too late for Arthur, and he died there in the hospital. The cause of death was listed as pancreatic trouble, but due to the suspicions of the admitting doctor, an autopsy was ordered. The coroner, Peter Hoffman, saw that the boy had been admitted experiencing symptoms of poisoning, and when he took a look back at the deaths of others in the Lindloff household, he also became suspicious. Hoffman took it upon himself to pay a little visit to Louisa under the guise of pretending to be a famous spiritualist medium looking for a chance to try out her famed Cleopatra's tear crystal ball. She was very proud of the crystal ball and allowed him to sit at it. When he did, he claimed to see the spirits of her 2 husbands, 2 daughters, and her son standing to her right. "They are accusing you of killing them," he said. At this, Louisa shouted, "You lie! They're standing to my left, and they are saying that I am innocent." It sounded like the jig was up for Coroner Peter Hoffman, but no matter, because shortly thereafter, the autopsy came back, which revealed high levels of arsenic in Arthur's body. After this, Louisa was arrested, and she was livid. Ironic that the spirits that had foretold of all the deaths in her family didn't warn her that this arrest would be coming. Upon searching her home, police found several poisons, including rat poison containing arsenic, mercury, and various other toxic substances. Now, many of these substances were pretty common in Victorian homes, but Louisa had a harder time explaining the presence of a couple of other items police found. They discovered what we describe today as a go bag that appeared to include several disguises. A hidden notebook was also found where Louisa had carefully listed each death and life insurance payout she received. For all the money she collected on the policies, though, it was discovered that she was essentially down to her last few pennies. But despite this, she had recently booked an expensive vacation. Even more interesting to investigators, they learned that she had only recently purchased a policy on Arthur's life and had instructed him to lie to the insurance agent about his age to receive a better policy. What's more, the very same day her son died, Louisa asked one of her boarders, Henry Cuba, to go down to the insurance office and pick up the check she assumed would be waiting for her. Officials believed this was enough evidence to charge Louisa with murder. Initially, the boarder, Henry, was also arrested as a suspected accomplice, but he was only held for a few days as it was quickly determined that he had nothing to do with the matter. Soon, the remains of other suspected victims were exhumed, and they all tested positive for arsenic as well. Friends and family members began to come forward relating stories of how every time Louisa successfully predicted the deaths of those around her, her psychic mediumship business would soar. So not only was she motivated by all the life insurance payouts, but by the positive PR it would bring her business as well. Others came forward stating that they had fallen ill after dining or drinking in Louisa's home, claiming Louisa had used them as test subjects to hone her poisoning methods. One such accusation came from a neighbor who claimed that her baby had been poisoned by Louisa. Others said she was known to poison neighborhood dogs to experiment with dosage and substance. It would later be uncovered that during the time she lived in Milwaukee, she had actually worked at a pharmacy where she had gained knowledge of various poisons and potions. Louisa, meanwhile, was outraged. How dare they accuse a grieving mother who had just lost her only surviving child of having any part in his death? It sounds like she initially took her beloved crystal ball to jail with her, where she consulted it regularly and consistently reiterated that her spirit guides were affirming her innocence. Eventually, though, the crystal ball was confiscated and examined and determined to be nothing more than common glass. The trial was held in October of 1912. Forensic specialists testified concerning the large quantities of arsenic found in the exhumed bodies of her other suspected victims. The famous predictions of her family's death dates and their corresponding insurance policies were also closely examined. Particularly damning testimony was given by her former maid, who said that Louisa's son complained that the water his mother brought him to drink was sandy, as well as testimony from neighbors that Louisa never gave her husbands the medicine the doctors provided, but she would amend or mix up her own. Louisa, though, doubled down that she'd done absolutely nothing to harm her family members, and it had solely been the prophecies of her spirit guides that allowed her to predict their death dates and arrange the policies in advance. She asserted that those same spirit guides were also promising that she would be acquitted. However, on November 5th, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury determined that Louisa was in fact guilty of murdering her son, Arthur. The verdict actually came as a surprise to everyone, as women were rarely found guilty for murder. In fact, Louisa was one of only 6 women to be tried for murder in Chicago that year, and the only one to be convicted. Though she was only tried and convicted for 1 murder, police suspected her victim count was actually closer to 9. Louisa remained stoic as the verdict was handed down, but she did have to be helped from the courtroom. Louisa was sentenced to 25 years in prison. She immediately filed for an appeal, but before the opportunity could be granted, she died in prison of intestinal cancer on March 15, 1914, at the age of 43. During her last few weeks, she apparently sat in her cell, refusing medical treatment right up until the very end, when she was transported to the hospital of the county jail. She was buried in Oak Ridge Glen Oaks Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois, which apparently is the same cemetery where her second husband and children are buried. I don't know, this seems to be a thing where victims wind up buried in the same place as their killers, which I suppose if you purchase a plot, that's your plot, but I don't know, something about that never sits right with me. My friends, this has been a Good Night Snack episode from A Good Night for a Murder. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. Please continue to share it with your friends. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you again soon.